Hello, everyone. I'm here to tell you a story from central Yukon in Canada about prioritizing multiple land uses and Indigenous values for conservation. But first, I'd like you to go on a little journey with me and close your eyes and listen to these words. The land is central to our identity. It is the source of life. We understand ourselves as part of the land, related to the entire natural environment and to everything in it. In our way, we see the interconnectedness of all aspects of life. Everything is imbued with spirit. I wanted to share those words from the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in Heritage Act, and they are from the elders from the First Nation, and I'd like you to breathe them in as we walk together through this story, as they have deeper meaning throughout. My name is Chrystal Mantyka-Pringle. That's me on the left of the screen. I work for the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada, but this project that I'm presenting was done in partnership with the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in First Nation. Where are we? In the top left-hand corner in kind of dark red, that's Yukon. And what you're looking at is all the Yukon First Nation traditional territories on the left in different colors. So Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in is here in blue, and in 1998, the Government of Canada, Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in, and the Government of Yukon signed a Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in Final and Self-Government Agreement. So these are constitutionally protected modern-day treaty and take priority over any other laws. And Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in is one of 11 First Nations that have settled their land claims and are now self-governing. So what you're looking on the right here is the different Yukon planning regions. So the Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in government have also embarked with the Yukon government a land use planning process under what is known as the Umbrella Final Agreement. And this land use planning process is called the Dawson Regional Land Use Plan, which overlaps a significant proportion of Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in's traditional territory. What this means as part of this land use planning process is that new areas will be put forward for sustainable economic activity and other areas for protection driven by all resource values and cultural values, as well as wildlife protection. There are multiple land use interests in the north, and particularly in Yukon, and the main resources that are being addressed through the land use plan are placer mining, quartz, or also known as hard rock mining, tourism, oil and gas, wildlife, and forestry. But what happens when there is Indigenous values as well on the same kind of plan? Coming from Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in, as quoted here, we have occupied this territory for all time. Our enduring relationship with our land is our heritage. Our stories are written on the land, and our place in this world is created, understood, and owned through these stories. So the Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada embarked on this journey as we felt that we could help blend some of these values together. The tools that we chose to aid in this process were Indigenous land use and cultural mapping, which is basically a process of mapping cultural and spiritual and material use of the environment and the interconnectedness between people and the land that they live on. So just a bit of background about Indigenous land use and cultural mapping. It originated in Canada and Alaska in the 1960s. And Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in First Nation wanted their own Indigenous value maps, not only to show the areas that are important for community well-being, but also as a mechanism to negotiate within the Yukon government about the need to establish protected areas. So we use a standardized interview guide, and each Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in participant or a family was interviewed on place-based experiences of the land that could be mapped. So these places were areas where, for example, they fish, they trap, they gather medicinal plants, they hunt, any places of significant cultural importance such as birthplaces, camps, cabins, grave sites, other gathering places, and also ideas that were passed down from the ancestors on ideas for future protection and other uses of the land. In total, we interviewed about 40 people or families over the course of the year. This is James Roberts proudly displaying his map after the one-on-one cultural mapping interview. And each map was color-coded and feature-coded so that it could be digitized according to the land username and the land use type. So each color is kind of grouped into provisional, cultural, income-generating activities, and then we also had a key for future land use protection of the land. So these are kind of examples of density maps showing the importance of different areas for traditional and cultural activities and values. And density maps is when we kind of collated all the interviewees and all the participants that did the cultural mapping exercise. So it kind of showcases the community responses. Then the next step, we use Zonation conservation prioritization software, which is a spatial modeling tool to rank and prioritize the different values on the land. Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in ranked the different layers through a survey. They used a survey approach and really deep discussions amongst them as to which values would get ranked highest. So this included the different layers that they were ranking included anything from ecosystem-based layers here on the far left, which are things like bioclimate zones, wetland inventory. Then we also had climate change considerations through climate corridors and a climate resiliency model. We also had a lot of species-specific information, including species distribution models, presence and absence of wildlife, and density distributions of individual species that are important in the region. And then finally, the indigenous land use and cultural mapping that we did together. Now, the outputs haven't been appropriately consulted with Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in citizens or even presented to the commission yet, so I can't actually show them, but this is kind of an example of how the software program brings all the values together through prioritization and algorithms. But what I can share, which I actually think is way more important, is the lessons learned along the way and the lessons that we're still learning. And I think this is important as the conservation community as ways to go forward in thinking and how we can bring these different worldviews together through our work. So the first lesson was that cultural mapping is not a substitute for Indigenous voices. It's only a tool. It needs to be accompanied by the Indigenous people themselves, and the importance so that they can express their ways of knowing and also their relationships to the land. Number two, requires a respectful and equitable narrative. Without this, those maps that we make or anyone makes could actually be at risk of misuse or have potentially unintended uses that are then counter to the interests of the map makers. So there would be some privacy loss concerns. So that's really important. Thirdly, careful design needed to prevent potential misuses. So what I mean by that is that it's important to protect traditional knowledge so that others don't misuse it for potentially hunting opportunities or, for example, in Yukon, in decisions made by resource extraction interests as to where to actually stake. So that's quite important to consider. Number four, meaningful descriptions and worldviews aren't always compatible with GIS. So an example I can give here is through the interviews. It was one thing that was continuously mentioned is the importance of all headwaters for clean and sustained water. And that was a large part of the map. So what we ended up doing is we ended up creating a new feature coded in the protection layer and that kind of marked the headwaters. So then we started kind of breaking down these walls, and we're trying to be more flexible to bridge the importance of the traditional knowledge and the scientific knowledge systems together. So it was a really good lesson, and we're still learning as to how to break those walls down. This experience was really rich in that it promoted storytelling between elders and youth. So I observed multiple times that intergeneration communication through this paper map was generating like a community empowerment effect. And people were really excited to see their knowledge and their thoughts on paper and how much they could actually share. So it was really important that we provided those paper maps back to the individual families, and many took them gladly and are now posted on their cabins, on the walls of the cabins, and they can now add to them continuously. Number 6, the use of Indigenous land use cultural mapping as part of like a spatial analysis is really powerful, and it's Indigenous led all the way. So it's really powerful that they then the First Nation can rank their priorities, and then it's a surrogate for blending Indigenous values and environmental protection into kind of modern day land use planning. And finally, it's really feasible. It's feasible in that it can be used by multiple people and in different ways, and there's flexibility. So our hope is to empower the land use planning community to use Indigenous value mapping with prioritization to help leverage traditional knowledge and other worldviews into the scientific knowledge systems. I had a lot of collaborators on this project, so it's important that I acknowledge the folks that were supportive in this work that are listed here, including funding agencies. And I'd like to finish with a quote from Tr'ondëk Hwëch'in, if I may. "It is our law to care for the land as it cares for us. We live in balance with its rhythms and respond to its demands. We make our decisions from the smallest to the most complex, with the future health of the land and ourselves in mind. We know that the smallest action can cascade outward in time and space and will impact the integrity of the land as a whole." Thank you. Merci Cho.